Most people hitting their 40s say they feel fine. Labs look normal, checkups are short, but beneath the surface, metabolism slows, arterials change, and the early stages of brain decline can already begin. Today's guest think we wait far too long before acting.
And he isn't guessing. He spent a decade cutting through complex research, trying to figure out which actions actually reduce the risk, and now he focuses on the steps that give you a better shot at staying sharp.
We'll go step by step through the routines and diagnostic priorities he sees as essential for midlife health. ApoB, glucose patterns, muscle mass, sleep VO2 max, all of that. Plus, what noise to ignore.
And we'll also stress test his thinking. When does prevention cross into over-testing? Where does evidence run thin? And what actually matters to have good outcomes and not just biomarker stories?
So now let's introduce our guest. Ali is a Stanford, UCSF, and Penn-trained physician who decided the usual reactive model of primary care doesn't really help people stay healthy as they age. So instead, he built a prevention-focused approach that uses solid evidence and simple routines, not noise. So, Ali, welcome.
Good to be with you guys. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here.
So let's start with something you've talked about quite often online, on social media, on your Substack and all of that. The doctor visit most people get is not really built to keep you healthy in the long run. So what's missing here?
Yeah, that's a great question, Niko. I practice medicine in the United States, as you know, and we have a system that pays doctors for doing procedures. So we're really good at fixing broken hips. We're very good at opening hearts when they're blocked. We're very good at taking cataracts out, but we're not so good at preventing those things from happening in the first place. And part of the problem is the incentive structure. It's just we're not paid for prevention. We're not paid to... Prevention takes time. Prevention takes a lot of personalization, and we don't have time in our busy healthcare system to do that. And so we get these rush doctor's visits. Even I, as a physician, when I go see my primary care, he tells me to eat healthier and to exercise, and that's it. And that's once a year. He sees me once in a year. How can he or she dive deep into my eating and my sleeping and my exercise in one visit per year? And if I'm a doctor, so I'll go see him twice a year. That's still not good enough. So we just don't have the system in place. And then you go back and look at the training, 4 years of medical school. And then if you do fellowship, you do more years of training. I recently learned that cardiology fellows, okay, so you just spend 3 years doing a cardiology fellowship. You get 0 hours of training in nutrition. Can you imagine you're going to see your heart doctor and they get 0 hours? And that's because they spend all their time putting stents in, fixing valves, again, fixing broken things, which you absolutely need. Like, you absolutely need somebody who's highly skilled at putting in a stent and opening up a clogged artery. But that man or woman is not getting any information about what the person should be eating, even after their heart is clogged. So it's just the system that we've set up is not built for this.
So you would say that the issue with the current system go beyond the incentives in terms of treatment, but really start already in the education?
It's in the education. We don't spend time, even when I was in medical school, a few hours maybe on nutrition. It's just not, we don't dedicate we dedicate our craft to learning about pharmacology, about pathology, about when things go wrong, how to fix it, which is usually when people show up to the doctor, right? Is they're in pain, they're suffering, right? They're having issues, and they don't want to hear about what they should have done 20 years ago. They want to fix it now.
Yeah. Definitely.
But you say that the system is also not really designed for, or is not appreciating enough the heart attack that didn't happen because someone acted early enough, right?
They never come in. Yeah, exactly. We don't learn from those people as much as we should. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. This is such an important topic, I think. I think we cannot talk about prevention enough. I think people really need to get that, the importance of prevention, how important it is. And also, like, for example, what you said with the nutrition training, I think this is super important and valuable information, because I think most people, when they go to the doctor, they think that the doctor knows it all. They think that the doctor has studied for years and maybe even decades, and so they must know everything about the human body. But clearly, they don't, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I see, I trained in ophthalmology and in retina, so I deal with a lot of elderly patients with retinal disease that is age-related breakdown of the retina. And they want to know, what can I do to prevent? And we've done one randomized trial of vitamin supplement 25 years ago. And that's all we tell them. There's a vitamin pill you can take. That's it. Like and people are frustrated. They're like, my mom had this disease. I don't want to get this disease. What can I do? And we have very little research-backed guidance to give to them, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Such an important factor to point out. When I looked at your like Substack, LinkedIn, and all of that, you are quite often and repeatedly talking about that midlife really is the point where the trajectory is set. So what's the physiological reason behind it, and what can people really do there?
Yeah, it's even scarier, Niko, because when they've done these autopsies of these young soldiers that die in war who are in their 20s and they open up their hearts, they see fatty streaks in the coronary arteries in 20-year-olds, right? So the aging process, the buildup of plaque, happens at a young age. It doesn't, we used to think heart disease is when you get 60, 65, 70. That's when you get heart disease. It's not. And something is happening as early as our 20s and 30s. So you've got already the food that we're eating, the environment that we live in is already causing plaque deposition in our arteries. If it's happening in our heart, it's going to be happening in our brains. It's going to be happening elsewhere. Cancer. We know that cancer mutations accumulate over time, right? Our immune system surveils these mutated cells and gets rid of them. But as we get older, our immune system begins to decline. The surveillance process begins to decline. The mutations build up. As far as dementia goes, brain degeneration, dementia, we don't think that this happens when you're 60 or 70. We think this happens earlier, right? There's probably some hormonal changes that are happening as we, hit our midlife. Our testosterone, if you're a man, our estrogen levels are falling. That's going to have an impact on the aging process. The other thing that's happening is we're starting to lose muscle mass. We know that each decade that we get older, we lose muscle mass. And muscle is very important, not just for looks, but it's also for metabolism. And so we're not processing the glucose, the carbs that we eat. And so we all experience this, my metabolism isn't what it used to be. When I was 30, I could eat whatever I wanted and I didn't gain weight. But now I'm gaining weight.
Overnight that changed, people think, right?
Yeah, this is real, right? It's a real thing. Our bodies are slowing down. And I also think midlife 40s is an interesting time of our lives because a lot of us have aging parents. So we see what our future could look like as we take care of our aging parents. So I think it's a vulnerable time of life, not just physiologically, but also mentally, emotionally. You start to see your own lab values get a little bit abnormal, that, you were totally fine, but now your blood pressure is 5 points higher. Your cholesterol is 10 points higher than you like it to be. And you see your aging parents. And so it's like a time to really, I think people say, okay, I need to double down and invest. I tell people, I was always taught that you don't save for retirement financially. You don't save for retirement when you're right before you retire, right? You start saving when you're in your 20s. And I think the same thought process has to be with our bodies and our health, right? You start saving for the future in your 20s and 30s. Invest in your health now and it will pay off, right? It compounds. It's just like saving for retirement. You put $1 in today, is going to compound interest, right? Healthy eating and healthy exercise today will compound in your 50s and 60s and 70s, I think.
Totally agree. But let's assume someone only made that realization in their 40s. So they haven't been paying much attention to their health or their lifestyle. Now they see their aging parents. They want to be there for them to the best extent they can. And they also kind of realize that health is something that will not likely change over time, and they want to take better care of themselves. What are the 3 things people should really put more emphasis on, would you say, especially in midlife?
I approach it with a lifestyle first philosophy. So I would say there's sort of 5 pillars that we all think agree on. Number 1 would be sleep. I would start with that and I'll go through those, but sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress management, and relationships, social connection. All 5 of those are important. You can pick which one you want to start on first. I think sleep tends to be pretty foundational because if you're not sleeping well, then you're not going to eat well, you're not going to exercise, you're not going to want to socialize. It's going to be hard to do all the other things. It's going to be hard to manage your stress. So I would start with simple habits around sleep. And it's not complicated. Try to sleep at the same time every day. Try to go to bed, stop eating 3 hours before you go to bed. If you can, sleep around the same time every day. Wake up around the same time every day. Get some morning sunlight so you set your circadian rhythm. Hopefully you can spend 7+ hours in bed, 7 to 8 hours in bed trying to sleep. Those are the basics. Alcohol before bed, not the best idea, as you guys know. So if you can get your sleep optimized, improved, then I think the other things will trickle over. And I think if the other two, you asked for 3, the other one I would start with is an exercise. I think moving your body, getting the blood flowing, getting the muscles moving is so helpful, both in terms of cardiovascular health, in terms of muscle health. And I think it doesn't have to be intense sessions in the gym. I think we've, here in the United States, we have Peloton, we have these cycle classes, we have these boot camps. I'm sure you guys have them in Europe as well. It's intimidating. Those are hard, intense workouts, right? And if you love that and you get motivated by that and you enjoy that, 100% do it. But it is not obligatory. It's not essential, right? Even just 7,000 steps or more a day has huge health benefits, right? A little bit of resistance training benefits twice a week, It doesn't have to be these hardcore workouts. The final piece, and I saved this for the third, is nutrition, because nutrition, I think, is the hardest one for people to change because there's a lot of emotion around it. There's religion around it. There's dogma. There's people who are hardcore keto, carnivore, vegan. I don't think the science is clear that one diet wins for everyone. So let's just say that up front, right? Like I'm not going to take a vegan and try to convince them that eating meat is the right thing to do, I do think that there's some principles that we can all agree on, right? Which is try to get your protein a certain level, right? And it's controversial. I think we're sort of obsessed with protein these days. At least here in the United States, you cannot go to a store without seeing protein bars and protein shakes and protein cookies. But there probably is some truth to needing a minimum amount of protein to keep your muscle in good shape. It's probably somewhere the U.S. recommended daily allowance of 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight is probably low. It's probably enough to prevent you from losing, but it's not going to be optimal. So maybe a little bit higher. There's some research saying up to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight gives you benefit, and probably diminishing returns when you get above that, right? So get protein in. I think we all agree that whole foods, plants, veggies, I don't think they're controversial. They're good for you. I believe that we should probably in the United States be more obsessed with fiber. That's the one thing that we're not getting enough of. The recommended amount is about 30 grams for a man, and I think 20 to 25 grams a day for a woman. And if you guys have tried to eat that amount of fiber, it is like a project. Like you have to think about fiber every meal, right? So it's like you got to eat fiber with breakfast. You got to eat fiber with lunch. You got to eat fiber with dinner. Like every meal's got to have like 5 to 10 grams, I think when it comes to nutrition, protein, fiber, I think we can all agree avoiding refined sugar, added sugars, limiting your drinking. Don't drink calories, don't drink sugar. It just hits your glucose very hard, right? So I think those are the basics. I also think that I'll touch on the last 2 pillars, if you allow: stress management and social relationships, right? I think I live in Silicon Valley, Bay Area, where like life is intense. People work hard, It's like a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people put in a lot of hours into their job, and then their kids are scheduled with so many extracurricular activities. So life is stressful, and we need better ways. We need to be mindful of how we manage that, because I do think that stress shows up in our physiology. There's no question that it affects your mind. I'll share the impact of the mind on the body. If I can share a story. I was at this conference this weekend, the Buck Institute, and Ellen Langer, who's a psychologist from Harvard, spoke at this, and she was one of the key highlights of the weekend for me. And she says it's not a mind-body connection, it's a mind-body unity, that mind and body are the same. There's a new theory, and she's done all these elegant experiments showing how when you manipulate the mind, how can it manipulate the body? And we know this with the placebo effect, obviously, right? And she shared this amazing story that she did the study that you guys might be familiar with. I think it's called the chambermaid study. And she took these people who worked in hotels to clean the rooms. And they asked them, do you guys exercise? And these women were like, no, we don't exercise. We work all day and we get home. We're so tired. We don't have time to exercise. So she took half of the women and she said, you know what? You guys clean, you guys do laundry, you guys change the bed sheets, you guys do all this stuff. It turns out that level of physical exercise meets for your daily exercise. And the other group of women, they were not told anything. They just continued to work as normal. So nothing has changed between these two groups of women other than one group was told that they're exercising. And they just continue to do their same jobs. And the shocking thing was the women who thought they were exercising, their blood pressure dropped. They lost weight. Their waist circumference went down. So the mind physiology connection is like unmistakable, right? It's remarkable.
Yeah.
To think that I don't need to manage my stress, I'm doing fine. It's showing up in our bodies, right? And when it affects our physiologies. Finding ways to manage our stress, whether that's meditation, whether that's yoga, if that's your thing, whether that's listening to music, whether that's going for a walk in the park, spending time at the beach, nature, you find your happy ways to cope with it, right? And the final thing I'll say is relationships and social connection, right? You guys may have heard of the Rosetto effect. I wrote about it in one of my posts. There's a little town back in the 1930s, 1940s, a little town in Pennsylvania in the United States called Rosetto. And it was this community of Italian immigrants that was very, very tight-knit. And these doctors had noticed that the patients coming from the neighboring town were having a lot more heart attacks than the patients from Rosetto. And so this smart physician was like, what's going on here? Like, why does the Rosetto people seem to be getting heart disease quite as much as the neighboring town? And literally they're neighbors. It's not like one town, the water supply was different, right? And they looked at their diets and they were not eating some super fancy vegan diet, right? They were eating sausages. They were drinking alcohol. They were drinking wine. They didn't have particularly low rates of obesity or something different physiologically, but they noticed that they were tight-knit community, family dinners, everybody took care of each other. The church was strong in that community, so there was people getting together on Sundays. And they found that it had a huge impact on their heart physiology, right? So it's like, I think we undersell the value of social connection. And at least here in the United States, there's a lot of loneliness. There's a lot of breakdown of community. We don't go to church on Sundays anymore. And so I think people are, especially post-COVID, right? It's like we lost some of that connection. So I think that's just as valuable for longevity as the first four things that I shared. Not talked about as much, right? But
I totally agree. I mean, there's also this Harvard study of adult development that has been ongoing for 80 years. And they found that the biggest predictor in midlife were not like cholesterol levels or other things, but was actually like the number, but more so the quality of social connections. And so what I was wondering, and I would love to hear your take on this, is given that the things we know about the importance of social relationships, stress management, and so on and so forth, and some of the basic other things that you've just mentioned, so sleep, nutrition, and exercise, isn't it a bit contradictory then that the longevity field has been kind of obsessing about, wearables or advanced biomarkers or supplement stacks and so on and so forth, all things that might have some impact or not, but by doing that kind of not putting enough emphasis on the things that really make a big difference?
yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, we have a field in the United States of medicine called lifestyle medicine that emphasizes a lot of these things. And guess what? Like, nobody cares. You know what I mean? It's just sad. It's just nobody clicks on it. Nobody watches YouTube videos about it.
Yeah.
Nobody's like, I need to go see my lifestyle medicine specialist, because it's not sexy. It's boring. It's way more sexy to talk about supplements and talk about, these plasmapheresis or red light, because this is like, you pay some money, you go do it for 20 minutes or whatever, and then it's going to help you, right? That's way easier. And then you just keep the rest of your life the same, right?
The external fix people are looking for, right?
Yeah. And it's easy to blame the healthcare system and blame physicians. Like, oh man, I go to my doctor and all he does is give me a prescription for statin or a prescription for metformin. But the reality is too, like, patients go to the doctors and they want these things. And they're disappointed if they don't leave with a prescription. And they know that they need to eat healthier and do more, but it's hard to change behavior. It's hard to change your habits. It's hard to change how you sleep or how you eat. But it's easier to sort of take a medication or a supplement or hop inside of a cold bath or a sauna, right, and do that. So I think that's part of it. It's our own culture and our own demands, right, that we want these things.
Yeah, very good points. If I may also bring a little bit about your personal background, because you have talked in your Substack and on LinkedIn about your own family and personal health history, and many clinicians intentionally decide to keep this private. You didn't. You decided to share it. Why did you decide to share it?
Yeah, good question. I wanted people to know that like I'm human and I deal with the same things. I'm not a physician who's immune to these things. I'm not like dialed in perfect health trying to preach it to you, right? Like I myself have, A1C that's pre-diabetes. I myself have elevated LDL cholesterol, right? Dementia is very personal to me because my father had dementia and my father passed away from dementia last year. And so I saw neurodegenerative decline and I want to educate people about that. And I think people, it's not, for me, this is both a professional interest, but it's a personal interest too. And I think people can relate to that. And I think even just sharing my story with the dementia and being a caregiver of a parent with dementia, people had come to me and said, isn't dementia just, you lose your memory. They forget where they left their keys, or they forget what day of the week it is, or they forget eventually who you are. And I think there's a misunderstanding of what dementia is. Dementia is a neurodegenerative disease, and I remember when my dad got hospitalized for the first time when he had dementia, I asked the physician, I said, where does this go? Like, how does this end? And he was like, patients with dementia, they lose the ability to walk, they lose the ability to swallow, or they lose the ability to eat. And people are like, whoa, they're blown away when they hear that because it's much more than a memory loss issue. It's a devastating neurological breakdown, right? Like your brain controls everything, right? And so you lose the ability like to take a spoon and put it in your mouth, and then all of the muscles that are required to swallow that bite of food. And so it's very real, I think, when you tell people this is what the end point of that disease is. It's not just like forgetfulness. That's how it starts, but that's not how it ends. And people pass away from complications of dementia, right? It's not like people with dementia. So the two things that people die from typically with dementia is swallowing into the airway and then they get pneumonia. And then two is infection because they're not hygienic. And so they're in bed and so they get urinary tract infections. And so I think when people see that and they hear that, they're like, whoa, like that's not something that I want to have, obviously. And again, then you can have the conversation with, okay, what can you do in your midlife to be set up so that when you're in your 70s and 80s, you can be in cognitive. We probably should say, change the thinking and the language to more like cognitive performance, cognitive optimization, rather than like dementia prevention, which is more like fear-based, but it's like, how can I met somebody who calls themselves a cognitive nutritionist. I'm like, whoa, that's cool. And it's like, it's just basically
Great
a
wording,
nutritionist.
yeah.
That's
like
a good
focused on
branding.
brain. Yeah, right. It's like, what should I eat so that I have a healthy brain, right? Like people would sign up for that, right? Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's amazing that you shared your own personal story and also your family story. I do this myself. For example, I have extremely elevated lipoprotein A, so high risk factor for cardiovascular disease. I also talk about this openly, also online on LinkedIn, for example. And I think it's super important for people to share their personal experience to really show that they are also vulnerable. So I think it's amazing that you share this, but I always wonder myself, even when I share this, obviously with personal decisions, there's always bias involved. So really the question here for me, which I also ask myself, is how do you really avoid letting fear shape your protocols and the things you're doing? And also bias as well, which is obviously human nature.
You're totally right. Yeah, you're totally right. I think it's important to discuss and disclose like what you're doing and the evidence behind what you're doing and what the data is. And then are there things that you're doing that you don't know, right? Are for sure going to help, but you're willing to take that risk because of your personal fear of that. So I think everything we do in this, we've talked about all these 5 pillars of health. We'll talk about other things too, but I think all of it, there's a great book if you haven't read it, and I'd recommend the audience too to check it out, by Annie Duker. It's about thinking in bets. She's a professional poker player. I don't know if you guys have heard of her. And she kind of makes this great example about life is a lot like poker where you're making bets, right? And so even me doing exercise, eating healthy, sleeping, social connection, it's a bet that it's going to help me. It's a good bet to make, right? Because we know there's a lot of data to support it. But at the end of the day, nobody knows with certainty that any of this is going to prevent me from getting dementia or heart attack or whatever, or cancer. Like tomorrow, we could all get diagnosed with something horrible, even though we did everything right. So all of this is bets. And I think when we share with patients, like, I think this is a good bet to make, right? I think lowering your LDL is a very good bet to make, regardless of how you choose to do it, right? That's a super good bet. That's a bet that I'm taking myself, right? Other things are like, okay, omega-3, fish oil. Okay, maybe it's a good bet. I don't know. It seems reasonable. I don't think it's like as good of a bet as these other things. So you can share with like, okay, because I'm so scared of dementia, I'm willing to do these things, which I think are solidly evidence-based, but I'm also doing these other things, which I'm like, okay, I don't know. I think it's a smaller bet. You can share that with people, and you can share this is your bias, right? But this is like, you do what you think makes sense for you.
Do you
Amazing.
think the current healthcare system allows for enough of that personalized risk reward assessment approach that you've just described? So that someone who, because they are not super healthy or in a difficult health situation, or because they have super high risk factors for one of the things that further down the line we do not really have adequate treatment for, that they might take a different route, not the very traditional one, and use more of the experimental approaches? Do you think the current healthcare system allows for that, and how do you see that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it probably varies which doctor you end up with and can they have that conversation with you. I think this raises an interesting question, which is, in this longevity space, we have a spectrum of people, and it's good sort of to figure out where you land on that spectrum, where your doctor lands and where you land. So I'll give you an example. Like, on one end of the spectrum, I'll put people that are willing to be super high risk and take big bets, right? Like, I don't know if this will work, but I'm willing to put this in my body. I'm willing to try it, like peptides, like hormones, like whatever. I'll try it. You could put, let's say, Brian Johnson into that category. Like, some people call him crazy. Some people call him a pioneer. Like, whatever you call him, he's willing to experiment and share that, right? And there's people who fit into that and they want to try it. They're the first adopters, the early movers, the risk takers, and we need those people. I would put like professional bodybuilders into that category, right? They're doing all kinds of stuff to get that edge, right? I personally wouldn't do that, but they're doing it and they're teaching the rest of us like, okay, don't do that, do this, right? Then you have the other end, let's say, which is like, I need randomized controlled trial data for everything. I need to see mortality benefit. I need to see this reduces heart attacks and strokes and cancer. And until I get that, I'm not going to do it, right? And maybe, let's say Peter Attia maybe is a little bit more closer to that end of the spectrum. Really just stick to exercise, stick to nutrition, stick to really, really gold standard stuff. And I'm not saying one of these extremes is the right answer, that you decide where you fit on that. I think I fit more on the Peter Attia spectrum of things. That's my bias. So it's like, you share that. Look, this is my bias. Like, I'm not going to be one of these extreme, try everything. But I'm not going to say that if you are willing to do that, that's your decision and you should have a conversation. I think the hard part in medicine is, in the United States, is if you recommend a treatment and something happens and it doesn't go well and the doctor feels liable for it, right? So I think we tend to be on the more practicing MDs in the United States who take care of patients tend to be on the more conservative, like Peter Attia side, right? Not on the biohacker, Brian Johnson spectrum. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, like I said, but it's just like, that's how we practice. That's the culture. It's the society we live in. So, and I think it's good for people on both ends of the spectrum to learn from each other too, right? Like to see, okay, where are you coming from? Because otherwise, sometimes regular conventional medicine can be a little closed-minded, right? A little bit less risk-taking. And maybe we can learn from the people that are at the cutting edge and experimenting. And I look at those people as hypothesis generators, right? They're showing us, okay, maybe there's a signal here. Let's now do this in a controlled fashion, right? Let's do a small study. Let's get 100 people, right? Let's do it. Let's follow them rigorously. Brian Johnson is maybe showing us examples of things we can try and like what it shows. So, and maybe medicine can learn. Like, I think like bodybuilders have been taking creatine, right, for decades. And creatine used to be this thing like, oh no, only bodybuilders take it. It's dangerous. Creatine's bad. Now my wife takes creatine. My wife came home the other day. She's like, yeah, I'm going to take creatine. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, this is crazy. Like, this is hilarious. Like, middle-aged women are taking, like, all my female friends now are on creatine. They're asking about creatine. So how far have we come with creatine, right? Like, we know it's like super safe and like it has all these positive effects and very little negative effects. So it's like, we've learned, right? So let's use the experimenters to teach us.
Yep, definitely. So for you personally, what's really the turning point when you say that something new coming out? For example, I mean, there are 1 million different quote unquote longevity interventions, metformin, rapamycin, off-label use of them, or stuff like plasmapheresis, TPE, total plasma exchange, all of this. What's the turning point for you to say, okay, this maybe makes sense to look at deeper and maybe even test it out? Like in terms of evidence, what do you need to see?
Oh, that's a good question. This is very hard. I would say whenever anyone is evaluating any intervention, you got to look at two things, safety and efficacy, right? And start with safety. Please, please, please focus on safety. Doesn't matter how effective this thing looks, always start with safety. You need human data. That's the other thing. A lot of this stuff is in animals. A lot of this stuff is in the lab. So you want human safety data. Ideally, you want something that's got years of follow-up. So you want to see what is the potential downside. Am I increasing my risk for one of these really bad things like cancer, which I worry about with things like peptides and growth hormones, right? What is the long term? You're getting cells to grow and proliferate. Like, where is this going to go south? So always have that in your mind. What is the potential downside? And then efficacy, again, you want to see human data. You'd be surprised how stuff is out there that doesn't have human data. Ideally, you want a product that's regulated. I mean, a lot of this stuff is like, you don't know the quality that you're getting, right? You don't know the material you're putting in. So you want something that's regulated. The best case scenario is if it's FDA approved, then it's regulated, even though it might be off-label. Okay, so I think a lot of people, I'll just spend a second. In medicine, we use a drug that is approved for one indication and we switch it and we use it for something else. That is completely commonplace and completely safe. So off-label. So there's peptides that are FDA approved for like one reason, but now we're repurposing it. I think that's an area where you have some data and you have some regulation, and it's like that'd be the first place I might experiment. Okay, this product its manufacturing is regulated. There's human data on it. And I guess
something such as SS31 that has been FDA approved for a very specific condition in a very specific population, but now has been getting more and more hype also for general mitochondrial improvements.
Yes. So that's something that you could consider as if you're going to go into this like new area, uncharted territory. That'd be the first place I'd put my foot in, which is like it's already FDA approved for one thing. So that tells us that one, there's safety data for something, right? Some population has received this compound and we know their safety profile. And number two, it's the manufacturing process is regulated because of that, as opposed to some of these compounds that are not even approved for human use, period. So you just don't know. And then if you're going to experiment, like you should get baseline, like depending on what you're looking at, you should get some baseline labs on yourself, get some metrics to know what your starting point is. Then you're going to give yourself this intervention, and then you should measure something that's changed. I have a hard time with like interventions in which you can't really measure the outcome. So you're just like, this is longevity. What does longevity mean? Like, am I just going to live 10 years more? How do I know that? If it's impacting my blood pressure, my cholesterol, my sleep score, at least some metric, right? Then you can say, okay, I took A and A did something.
No, love that. Love that. Also a kind of pre and post testing approach so that you have the baseline and then you kind of know what works and what doesn't. Given everything that has been happening like in the past few months and years and the hype that has been around many of these topics, what is the one intervention you would like to see more evidence on, like more clinical trials being conducted in humans that is currently not the case, but where you would say, okay, it actually might be really interesting to look at least in a small scale?
Yeah, I've been nerding out lately on red light, just learning about it. I'm not saying that it's necessarily ready for widespread, but like you said, what's an area of interest?
Yeah.
Andrew Huberman had this physiologist from the UK, from University of College London, on his podcast a couple episodes ago, and you guys should check it out. And he's done this amazing research on the benefits of red, infrared, near infrared light on the human body. So intuitively, we evolved under the sunlight, right? The full spectrum of sun. And so it would make sense to me that our bodies have adapted to living under the sunlight. If you just think about it, only in the last few hundred years have we put on clothes and spent more time indoors than outdoors, right? And so we already know the sun is so crucial for vitamin D, and we already know the numerous benefits of vitamin D. And now we're learning about potential benefits of red and infrared light on the mitochondria. And as a retina specialist, I'm very keenly interested I'd love to see more research on how we can slow the aging of the retina, preserve our vision. The retina is one of the most mitochondrially packed cells in the body. And if you think about it, from the second you wake up and open your eyelids to the minute you close your eyelids, your retina is processing light, like literally, just like your heart is beating 24/7. Your retina is almost working 24/7, except when you're sleeping. And so this idea that like we could improve the mitochondria, we all have this complaint, like patients complain, my night vision is not as good, right? Like my driving at night is not as good. Like, how come I need more light to see? And we know that the rods and the cones, the rods are the cells, the photoreceptor cells that help us see in the dark. We know that as we age, we have a decline in the number of our rods. And in fact, by the time you get older, you lost a third of your rod cells, okay? If there's a possibility that red light could improve the health of our mitochondria, the health of our rods, and we could maintain good vision in older age, that would be amazing, right? And if that could come from just spending more time in the sun, which has the full spectrum of red light. So what we don't know is shining a red light into your eyes for a few minutes a day versus spending time in the sun, where you're getting obviously a less concentration of wider spectrum. It's not just red, but it's other colors too. So I'd love to see research on that. I'd love to see the benefits in more human data, more long-term follow-up, and see if it's a practical. There's a company that's made a red light device that got FDA approval for shining red light into the eye for the treatment of age-related macular degeneration.
Mm-hmm.
It's human studies. It's FDA approved. The retina community hasn't adopted it widely because it was like a 100-person study. The FDA doesn't require huge studies for devices as they do for pharma. So small study, 1 or 2 years of follow-up, small benefit, right? But I'd love to see more research on that. So yeah, that would be something I'd be keen on.
Yeah, that's also personally for me, I think infrared light, red light in general, super interesting topic. I also did a deep dive into this as many other topics. I'm always going down into the rabbit hole, and I think it's extremely interesting. So I really love that you share your experience also in terms of the eye, in terms of macular degeneration, for example. I think that's super interesting field. For now, I really want to go back. You touched upon the testing aspect already, that we need to do test things. So I want to get a bit more direct here. So what testing matters for the average, let's say midlifer, like 40, 50, maybe even 60 years old, who generally still feels fine and thinks probably they're in good shape and good health in general. What still matters for them to test?
Yeah, great question. So let's look at it like the 3 leading causes of death. Maybe we could put in the 4th as metabolic disease. So we got heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative disease, and then we'll say metabolic dysfunction as like underlying maybe all of those. So we need to look for signs of those. So let's look at cardiac. We want to do it. We know that blood pressure and cholesterol are causally playing a role in heart disease. They're causing heart disease. So we need to look at, you can feel totally fine, obviously, and have elevated blood pressure. So we need to accurately measure blood pressure. And a lot of that needs to be done at home, not just in the doctor's office. You need to do it, just like you don't weigh yourself once and then that's your weight. You need to check your blood pressure. Lipid panel, there's a lot of interest in, is LDL the right marker? I think for most people, LDL is good enough. If your LDL is high, probably your other stuff is also messed up. But if your LDL is borderline, ApoB is probably a more accurate lipid marker. It's a marker of the number of particles that are colliding against your artery walls as opposed to just the cholesterol concentration. Lp(a), as you've mentioned, I also have elevated Lp(a). This is a genetic, as far as we know, it's a genetic problem. We don't know of any lifestyle intervention or dietary intervention that causes it or changes it, but you should know your Lp(a), because then you want to aggressively manage all your other risk factors. And the good news is we have drugs in the pipeline to decrease Lp(a) that are coming very soon. So the other heart test that I recommend people get is a coronary artery calcium scan. It's a low radiation CT scan. You can get it here in the United States for $100 to $200 US. It's a 5-minute test. There's no contrast that's injected into your body. It's just a scan, and it's going to look at calcium deposition in your coronary arteries. And it's a marker for your plaque burden. So it doesn't look at soft plaque, but the reality is, like, if you've got calcified plaque, you probably have soft plaque. So it's a good way to test. And again, if you should have a score of 0. Yeah. If your score is not 0, then you need to be aggressive about your lipid management. And then second is cancer. So testing. Cancer is an interesting area. Screening is sort of where the emphasis is, right? So if you are living in the United States and you're 45 years old, you should get a colonoscopy. You should at least look into colon cancer screening starting at 45. It's a little bit controversial. Does colonoscopy save lives? But there was a randomized study done in Europe, done in Norway, and a few other countries that was able to show at 10 years a small decrease in colon cancer deaths. Small, humblingly small lowering of colon cancer death from colonoscopy. We're hoping that at the 15-year mark and the 20-year mark, the difference in death will increase from the group that got the colonoscopy versus the group that didn't. But so I think catching cancer early and treating it is one way to save yourself from cancer. If you're a woman, there's obviously mammograms. If you're a woman, there's cervical cancer screening is highly effective at saving lives. So you want to do that. And then prostate is controversial. I'll just share that there was a big study in the New England Journal of Medicine this year done out of Europe. There was 8 countries in Europe. They looked at 160,000 men screened for prostate cancer, PSA test. 160,000 men, 80,000 got the PSA testing, 80,000 didn't get it, followed for 23 years. Phenomenal, right? God, Europeans, you guys are so awesome for your long. 23 years. We would never do a study like that in the United States. The rate of death in the control group, 1.6% of the men died. In the rate of death in the PSA screen group, 1.4. It's just barely. Because the numbers were so large, that was statistically significant. So the headline was, PSA screening saves men from getting prostate cancer death, but really, it doesn't really make a huge difference. So the population of men that was in the study, I think, was 55 and older, and they stopped screening around 70. But if you're in your 40s, I think it's worth getting a PSA, because if your PSA is high in your 40s, that's not cool. That's not normal. If your PSA is high in your 60s, that's more understandable, right? The reason, by the way, that this study had to follow people for 23 years and barely showed a benefit is because prostate cancer is very slow. And so you can have prostate cancer and not die from it. So that's the cancer screening bucket that you should test. The third area was brain degeneration. There's not a lot of testing that we have here. Unfortunately, we do have ApoE allele testing, as you guys may have. So if you have ApoE44 allele, it's a simple blood test you can get. It increases your risk. So you may want to know that. If you are in the camp that dementia is preventable, then you would want to know that number, and so that you could be more aggressive with your lifestyle. If you're in the camp that there's nothing to be done, then it's not a test that would cause more anxiety. There's a new marker that's come out that you guys may have heard of called p-tau 217. This is a blood test you can get that is elevated years and years before a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia is made. And there are studies showing that you can intervene with healthy lifestyle and lower your p-tau blood marker. So that might be another test to consider, because there's some action you could take to lower it. And then the final piece of testing would be your metabolic health, because if your metabolism is not healthy, then all of these other 3 things, including cancer, you have higher risk of. And so you can feel good, but have an elevated blood glucose, elevated hemoglobin A1C. A lot of people in the longevity space believe in testing fasting insulin. I'm not totally sure. I'm not sold on it, but I'm not against it either. Fasting insulin is a marker in your blood that's very up and down throughout the day. So even a fasting insulin, depending on how you slept, depending on a lot of factors, can fluctuate. The other thing you could consider doing if you're at risk for metabolic disease is a oral glucose tolerance test, right? Where you take a bolus of glucose and then you measure your blood sugar at various time points out to 2 hours. I think that's highly predictive. You want to look at your liver function. So liver is one of the organs that gets damaged when you're not metabolically healthy. And what's happened, I think this is a good point to take a moment to point out that a lot of these blood markers, you're given a range by your laboratory, and that range is considered normal, right? And that, what people don't appreciate is those are based on the lab will give that range based on a bell curve of what they're seeing in the population. That lab is not saying that your blood marker being X is healthy. They're just saying this is normal for the 100,000 people that we tested. This is the normal range. Okay, that doesn't mean that's normal. And especially in the United States, where we have more obesity, more disease, liver test is one of those tests that's drifted higher and higher. So what's normal, higher than it used to be like 30 years ago. That doesn't mean that like our livers have changed. Like our liver is still our liver, and so just because the lab value says normal doesn't mean that it's optimal. And I think liver testing is one of those areas. So you really want to be on the low end of normal or even like below normal when it comes to your liver function for metabolic health. So you got to check your glucose. You got to check your liver function. And then the other thing that people may not appreciate is that your lipid panel can give you a lot about your metabolic health, which is your triglyceride and HDL ratio. So if you have high triglycerides and low HDL, that is a sign of being metabolically not healthy. So you want your ratio to be 1. I think the 1 is, I have not met anybody who's a 1 yet. So if you guys are 1, let me know. My ratio is like 1.5. But if your ratio is like 2 or 3, then you're in the red zone, But so just something to keep in mind. So that's the blood work. When you said testing, that's blood work. There's a lot of other blood work that the longevity folks might tell you to get. Biological clocks is one of those, methylation clocks. I'm not a big fan.
Same.
I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of variability, right? On those, you could literally test yourself with 2 vials on the same day and get different results. Let alone, and that's the same company, but there's also like 5 different companies, and you could also go, you get wildly variable results there. Genetics, that's interesting, right? So there are genetic panels that you can do, looking at your genes that put you at risk for cancer. So going back to the cancer, I think that's worth doing. If you have a BRCA mutation, for example, you're a woman, you're at high risk for breast cancer, I think that's worth knowing. And then microbiome testing is also becoming very trendy and popular. I personally just don't know enough about it. I think the conventional medical community hasn't adopted it. I think the evidence isn't quite there yet. The microbiome is important. We can't deny that. Does knowing which species and what prevalence those species are, does that tell me something about my health? We don't know yet. We just don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think I'll say TBD, to be decided on the microbiome testing. And then I'm a big believer in DEXA scan and VO2 max, as you guys know. So that's, if there's one area that I think conventional medicine is behind the times and is lacking, DEXA scan and VO2 max, they're not these cutting edge tests that are just like out like last year. Okay. Like athletes have been doing, this is where we can learn from our bodybuilder athlete community, right? Like a DEXA scan is a 5-minute test, and it's going to tell you your bone density. It's going to tell you your muscle mass. It's going to tell you your visceral fat. Those are 3 huge, useful things. I think it's silly that we tell women in America that when you're 65 is when we're going to start screening your bone density. When you're 65, it's like you're about to retire and you realize you only have $10 in the bank.
Yeah,
You should
pretty
figure
much.
that out when you were in your 40s, right? So we should be testing women earlier. We should be testing men. There's a lot of sedentary men out there whose bones could be more healthy. Muscle mass, why do we care about it? Like I mentioned earlier, it's not just a bodybuilder aesthetic thing. Muscle mass is important for your ability to lift your suitcase into the overhead compartment when you're 70 years old and you're traveling on vacation, right? We all want to be able to do that. We all want to be able to sit on the ground and get up from the ground, right? And we need a certain amount of muscle to do that. And muscle mass, obviously important for glucose disposal, glucose metabolism. And then VO2 max, big popular thing in the longevity community, totally missed by conventional medicine, right? You go to your doctor and your doctor says, what do you do for exercise? Well, I walk, I play pickleball, I go hiking with my friends. That's great. But if it doesn't show up on your VO2 max as your VO2 max benefiting from that, then we're missing something, right? So I think physicians should encourage all their patients to get on a treadmill, put on that little mask, find out what their VO2 max is, and then they can double down on their physical activity or decide, I'm actually doing okay, or no, maybe I need to do better, And improving your VO2 max is also not this impossible thing. Like you can do it, it's doable
100% agree.
at all ages. Like even if you're 70, you can improve your VO2 max.
And it starts for many with getting like an objective baseline to know what they're currently at, and then kind of really that this also serves as an incentive for them to stick to an exercise routine, right? And I love so many of the things you've just mentioned with regards to the testing, and also the nuance that we need to look at, especially when we look at the reference ranges in a potentially unhealthy population. What really does it mean to be optimal, and so on and so forth. So I love how you also looked at the interconnectedness of these things. One thing that you have been discussing is also metabolic health, and potentially then also like obesity and so on and so forth. And especially like in the last couple of months or years, there has been this sharp increase in hype around a certain new class of drugs, or maybe not new, but for the general public, the GLP-1. And even more recently, aside from the weight loss effect they have, people have been talking a lot about GLP-1s for longevity. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've avoided the GLP-1 hype because it's like, man, it's everywhere. So I'm like, nah, I'm going to ignore this. But then I've been looking into it lately myself, and I'm very impressed with some of the data that I'm seeing. So I'll share one example. The SELECT trial was obese patients who didn't have diabetes and heart outcomes, heart attacks, heart health. And they found that in the absence of diabetes and in the absence of weight loss, there was benefit to the heart, right? There were patients in the trial who didn't lose weight, but still had reduced heart attacks. So these drugs have a heart protective effect independent of obesity, independent of diabetes. That's already super interesting, right? So that means you and I could potentially take these compounds and have heart benefit from it, right? There are cancer doctors who are recommending GLP-1s for their cancer patients who have had breast or colon cancer, and they believe that this is helping in the cancer recovery. How that mechanism is happening, we don't understand. Independent of obesity, okay? Independent of diabetes. There's also evidence that these GLP-1 compounds lower inflammation. People are seeing lower CRP. People are seeing other inflammatory markers come down. And we know that inflammation is a big part of aging, right? So if you can inflammation. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So if we lower inflammation, could we also then have a longevity molecule here? So this is super exciting. I don't think we have fully understood all of the benefits of the GLP-1 drugs. For the audience, please understand that GLP-1s have been around since, I think 2005 is when the first generation was approved. They weren't very effective for weight loss, which is why they never became popular. They were made for diabetes control, and they were mediocre at it. So we have 20 years of exposure or information about GLP-1s, not in the potency that they have now. In addition, GLP-1 is a molecule that is made in our gut. So this drug was discovered because, oh my God, people are making this in their gut. When you eat, your gut makes GLP-1. The GLP-1 goes to your pancreas and tells your pancreas, make insulin because there's food coming in the pipeline. It's like a signaling system, right? Which is beautiful. So GLP-1 drugs tap into the body's natural system. It's not like we're introducing a molecule that's like this foreigner, right? It's not like a statin. Statin doesn't exist in the body, right? A statin is a foreign drug that we're putting in there to alter our cholesterol. So it makes intuitive sense to me that GLP-1s could have a lot of benefits. We obviously know too that they have impact on our cravings. And if we're going to, crave sugar less, crave alcohol less, crave cigarettes less, that could have health benefits. So I don't know where this is going to go in terms of longevity, because it's going to be very hard to do a study of healthy people who don't have diabetes, who don't have obesity, right? And then follow them for 10 years and see who lives longer and who doesn't.
So maybe we still need to rely on the bodybuilders for now.
We might have to. We might have to rely on these people that are doing these experiments. The other thing that's popular, I'll touch on, which is micro dosing of GLP-1s, which sounds super hot and sexy, but it's just taking a small dose, right? It's just literally, and it's a very simple concept, which is like, if the drug works at a higher dose, could it work at a lower dose? And we have to remember that the pharmaceutical companies, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, took these higher dose approaches because they wanted massive amounts of weight loss, right? That's how they make their money. What they didn't test is, what is the lowest dose for inflammation? What is the lowest dose for heart, kidney, brain health, right? That wasn't the market that they were going after. And so I think it's a fair point to ask, can I take a much lower dose, lower side effects, but still get some of the benefits? And over a long period of time, maybe it does prolong health span and lifespan. We don't know. But we do know that these drugs are pretty safe. And we know that the lower doses are even safer than the doses that people are taking that are approved.
Definitely. I think GLP-1s in general are such a fascinating topic. And I love all your takes on this, and I think it has great potential also in terms for longevity. The microdosing you mentioned, I think it's super interesting, and I think there are 10 million more things we could talk about. But for now, I think I'm super happy to have you on our podcast, Return on Health, and I loved everything you shared here for our viewers. I think it's super valuable for them, and I really would like to thank you for coming on. And yeah, I hope the viewers got some great knowledge out of this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to share and help people on their health journey. For anyone listening, it's great that you're here. It's great that you're investing your time into thinking about your health. And whatever age you are, wherever you're at in your health journey, this is the time. Today is the day. Tomorrow's the day. Do it.
Love that message.
Love that message. Love it.
Just It's great.
Also, looking forward to potentially recording a second episode with you in the future, and maybe delving into some of the other topics that people are desperate to hear more about, and hearing your very interesting, because also what I loved about it, very nuanced takes. So thank you very much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, Miguel. Thanks, Niko.
Thank you.